viewing the treaty's suspension or the abeyance, that's the right word to use, solely as a punitive response to terrorism, I think really misses the mark. You have to see counterterrorism from a different perspective. This might be one of the elements to it, but this can't really be your end game.
Right.
It won't immediately hurt Pakistan, that's for sure. Any impact, the larger impact, the broader impact, hinges upon India's future ability to build the water storage infrastructure, which we have not done so far.
You're watching The Gist on Strat News Global. I'm Ramananda Gupta. Before we start today's program, I'd like to urge all our viewers to like, share, and subscribe. Our very, very special guest today is Uttam Kumar Sinha, Senior Fellow at the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analyses, and a leading scholar and commentator on transboundary rivers, climate change, and the Arctic. Thank you so much for joining us, and it's a delight to have you with us.
Thank you.
So, let's I guess you already know why we are doing this discussion. It's to do with the, what we are calling the suspension. Is suspension the right word? Of the Indus Waters Treaty with Pakistan. Because I don't think you can really revoke it as such legally, which is the first question I wanted to ask you. Well, how tenable is this suspension or, whatever it is legally? I mean, is there a legal precedent to it?
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show, Ram. It's a good question you ask in midst of uproar and strong sentiments. And I think a general lack of knowledge on transboundary water sharing. Passions are high, but rivers tend to flow. But let me explain the question. And you asked this from a legal point of view. We have to go back to 1960 when the treaty was signed. And there was no provision for abrogation or suspension or abeyance, whatever you call it. In fact, there was no exit clause. And it was felt that the treaty will bind the two countries together through mutual trust and cooperation so that both can optimally utilize the waters of the Indus Basin, that is the Western River, the Eastern River. So it was thought in that manner. After long negotiations, hard and bitter negotiations, when they all came to an agreement, it was thought that this is the best way, that the treaty will bind these two countries and both can develop optimally and utilize the waters to their best capability. Now, since the treaty was signed in 1960, it is not, as some people argue, that we have to look at the Vienna Convention. But the Vienna Convention on the law of the treaty was only signed in 1969, the year when the Vienna Convention was adopted. So this treaty, the Indus Water Treaty of 1960, has no legal basis in terms of the Vienna Convention. So you cannot really argue the treaty through the Vienna Convention. In fact, Article 4 of the Vienna Convention says that the convention applies only to treaties concluded by states after entry into force of the convention. Now, it entered into force in 1969. So, if the IWT, the Indus Waters Treaty, was signed in 1969 or after that, it would have been bound by the provisions regulating the rights of withdrawal. But it has not. And, the Vienna Convention does not, therefore, apply because India is not also a signatory of the convention. And Pakistan has not ratified the convention. So we should keep away the Vienna Convention aside. Now, let's come to the question of abeyance and suspension. And this is the term that we are using. Suspension is more or less, from a legal point of view, it's a very formal process requiring a notification from a party suspending the treaty, even if it is done unilaterally. Abeyance is, in some sense, it's an expression of a sovereign right to place the treaty in a suspended state or not to execute its obligations under a treaty. We have done that. We have done it formally, in fact. We've sent a letter. The Jal Shakti Secretary has sent a letter to the Secretary of Water Resources in Pakistan, notifying, and the word that has been used is abeyance. Right? The treaty does not contain these provisions, whether it's abeyance or whether it's suspension. In fact, as I said, there is no exit clause. Under the treaty, it could only be terminated by a ratified treaty concluded between two governments for that purpose. So I think it should be very clear what we are doing here is based on the circumstances that have emerged. And nothing really suggests that the treaty is telling us whether abeyance is right or whether the suspension is right. So I think whether it is legally tenable, and this is a question you ask, well, I would say that it is a rightful unilateral decision. And in any case, since the Uri attack, the treaty has functioned more or less, it's functioned more informed than in any kind of concrete substance. The mutual trust that the treaty called for has totally been eroded. So India's latest action makes it very clear that we are now in an era of that the era of business as usual diplomacy, which existed for almost 63 to 64 years on water, is over. And the abeyance is, I think, not merely administrative. It is also a very strong statement against Islamabad's what the Indian government describes it as compulsively destructive conduct, as described. So, especially it's this kind of unwavering support for terrorism and its use of treaty to obstruct India's legitimate water projects. So, India has cited, therefore, while issuing this letter, has cited fundamental and unforeseen changes in circumstances as a legal basis for reassessing the treaty's obligations. Right? And therefore, as it has earlier also evoked Article 12.3 to modify the treaty, and this followed a January 2023 notification urging Pakistan to engage in a very fresh look at the agreement. And therefore, what we find is an end game that has happened finally. The institutional framework of the treaty has already been stalled. And the pahalgam incident, I would describe it as the last straw on the back of the camel to eventually say that this treaty is in abeyance. Yes.
Can you think of any other sort of treaty or whatever in the world which is sort of in perpetuity?
No, I don't think so. So, in that sense, the treaty was unique. And also, it was a treaty which was designed and thought through by the engineers on both the sides. So, they realized that if it were given into the hands of the diplomats or the political leaders, then the entire purpose of the division of the basin would be futile. And therefore, they had no exit clause. What they had was provisions and restrictions. So you could do certain things and you could not do certain things. And I think the provisions and the restrictions, in a sense, made the treaty robust. Right? What really happened is that I think the Pakistan, as a lower riparian, they were very tactical and they were, I think, they were quite smart in using elements of restrictions, ambiguity around it, to stall India's projects, especially on the western river in Jammu and Kashmir. So in that sense, it's a unique treaty, but I think it's a unique treaty in which the lower riparian Pakistan used it to its own interest, basically to stall projects that India was purposefully trying to complete in Jammu and Kashmir.
So, in a recent article, you wrote that the immediate impact is to open up New Delhi's options and increase uncertainty in Islamabad. But even if you were to sort of, step up attempts to desal, divert, and dam the waters of all the 6 rivers, even on a war footing, how long would it take for Pakistan to actually sort of start feeling the impact?
Well, we really don't know because probably this is the first time that we're doing this. So it will be a good study really to see what kind of impact, the level of impact that this sort of approach brings
Mm-hmm.
to Pakistan. But my point here is that viewing the treaty's suspension or the abeyance, if that's the
Mm-hmm.
right word to use, solely as a punitive response to terrorism, I think really misses the mark. You have to see counterterrorism from a different perspective. This might be one of the elements to it, but this can't really be your end game.
Right.
It won't immediately hurt Pakistan, that's for sure. Any impact, the larger impact, the broader impact, hinges upon India's future ability to build the water storage infrastructure, which we have not done so far in the last
Mm-hmm.
62 years. We are moving towards it, especially in the last 5 to 6 years. We've cleared many projects on the western rivers, particularly on the Chenab.
Mm-hmm.
But this process will obviously require plenty of time and plenty of resources before these water storage infrastructures come into place. Once you have water storage infrastructure, you have therefore the ability, if you like, to manipulate the flow. But in any case, even if you do manipulate the flow, you would damage to some degree, to some extent,
Mm-hmm.
Pakistan's agricultural land, but not to that effect because Pakistan has over the years also built in its infrastructures on its
Mm-hmm.
various rivers, which are multi-purpose infrastructure, so it can
Okay.
offset what India is trying to do. But yes, any stoppage of water or any release of water, uh, especially the timing is important, can have damaging effect on the lower right level. So
Mm-hmm.
that really has to be thought through. It's a long-term game. For such leverages to materialize, I think even your new projects has to be designed in certain ways to regulate flows that can impact the agricultural cycles in Pakistan.
Mm-hmm.
So far, India, we have the projects that we have are run-of-the-river projects that generate hydropower without
Right.
altering the natural flows.
Mm-hmm.
And it reflects that India has, over the years, over the decades, has had a very disciplined adherence to the treaty. We have followed the provisions of the treaty, even while our patients have some from time to time eroded. So, but we'll have to see because we've never done this, and the run of the river projects that we have, whether we can stop it. And I mean, we're getting news that the Salal hydropower project has the gates have been shut. But let's see what kind of damage it will create and what kind of impact it will have on our side as well. So
Mm-hmm.
this is a space to look at and see how it will unfold.
So
But
what I'm hearing is, sorry, go ahead.
sorry, I look at suspension, this abeyance more from a point of view of developing our own water resources on our side of the Indus Basin. The leadership in the past and the water development planners in the 70s, 80s, I think lost much ground to Pakistan on the interpretation of the treaty. And therefore, we
Mm-hmm.
had various projects stalled and delayed. So now, with the abeyance, I think India can go full ahead with the projects on the Western rivers. The Western rivers
Mm-hmm.
gives you is described as permissible storage capacity as per
Right.
the provisions, and
Mm-hmm.
we did not pay very serious attention to that. But now, a lot of projects have been identified for storage purposes. For example, the Bursar multi-purpose project, that's on one of the
Mm-hmm.
tributaries now. We have that will store about 1 million acre feet of water. That's a substantial amount. And if you like, you can manipulate with that water in terms of release,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of stoppage. And there are lots of detailed project reports happening in several other storage projects, like the JISPA project. This is
Right.
on, so there are projects in the pipeline, but these projects will take time, and let's see how it will work eventually.
Mm-hmm. But so what I'm hearing is that right now the impact is more psychological, but there is a chance of it being real, hurting Pakistan badly further down the line. But
Mm.
there is also a parallel argument. You mentioned that Pakistan has also built up some infrastructure, but there is an argument that says that Pakistan could have built a lot more than what they've done. and that would have sort of offset a lot of the damage that they now seem to face. Is that a valid kind of a
No,
argument?
I don't think so. I don't think it is a valid argument. Pakistan, dam building. Pakistan, by the way, is one of the biggest, largest dam builders in the world after China. Dams have always been a backbone of Pakistan ever since its establishment. Given its geography as an inland country with mountainous region, uh, Pakistan needed always proper management of the water resources, especially the smooth water flow into its agricultural productivity, its energy needs, and its overall economic stability. Water was very crucial. And I think the development planners always viewed water infrastructures as part of their overall economic development. And successive governments have seriously looked into projects to build major dams in Pakistan and achieve irrigation facilities for agriculture, produce hydroelectricity. For example, the Mangla Dam, which was completed in 1967, is a significant water structure in Pakistan. In a certain sense, holds many of its provinces together. The Tarbela Dam, again completed in 1976. These were dams with a certain vision. They were not just great infrastructural achievements, but they represented a certain national pride, a certain self-sufficiency in Pakistan. So there are plenty of dams and multi-purpose roads. In fact, I would say that Pakistan has been more upfront in utilizing the provisions of the treaty than we have been. And that is why we are virtually on the western rivers, we are nowhere. Whereas Pakistan have completed many of their projects, the interbasin projects, etc., as defined by the treaty. So I think their infrastructures are in place, and this could be one of the reasons why it will help them cope with some of the things that India would be doing upstream. So not just the Mangla or the Tarbela Dam, even some of the new dams over the years, for example, the Wasak Dam, constructed on the Kabul River near Peshawar. It's a very useful dam for irrigation and power facilities, especially in the Khyber Pakhtunwala area. And then the Neelam Jhelum hydropower project, again a multi-purpose project, which was completed very recently in 2018. It's again meant to generate hydropower and bring in development to Pakistan areas. Also deal with flood control. That's very important as well. So and dams, the South Dam, which has great capabilities. So infrastructures are in place. So while stopping waters from our structures to Pakistan will help them to an extent, it will not permanently damage them. But we have to see, because this has never been done, as I said before.
So is that, if they have built all these dams, is that one of the reasons why there is a problem with silting up of the rivers towards the Arabian Sea?
Yes, I think they have built so many structures on the rivers that eventually the Indus doesn't even reach the Arabian Sea. But I think the problem for Pakistan is less to do with whether India is giving water to them or not. The problem lies more in how they are sharing the water between Punjab and Sindh. I think that is their conflict point, really. Raising issues with Pakistan, with India about sharing water is a diversion, I think, which the Pakistani establishment has, well calculated and practiced over the years. The real issue there is between Sindh and Punjab. Punjab gets much of the water. It's a fertile area. Much of the development happens there, and Sindh gets a trickle. So, and in fact, one of the new canal proposal by the army chief was precisely to resolve this issue. Building in this 6 canals, and many of these canals will get the waters from the Indus, and some from settlers in India. These canals were designed to give the impression that much of the water will also flow to Sindh, but the Sindh people are not very confident with this planned canal project that they have. They fear that ultimately it will be all controlled and the water will be only for the Punjabi land. Punjab was a great influence in power structures in Punjab. So the
Mm-hmm.
issue, I think, more is internal in Pakistan.
Mm-hmm.
So with India is a distraction basically. It just sort of builds up an international anti-India flavor, which they've mastered very well. Continuously saying that India is doing this, doing that, stopping the flow, hurting them, making us dry, flooding them, etc. But the core issue is that Pakistan is it's the country which has the worst water management schemes in the world, and
Mm-hmm.
its water distribution between its provinces, despite very visionary sort of constitutional uh, sort of plans, it's still lacking in its implementation.
Mm-hmm. So, since you mentioned sort of that this provokes anti-India sentiment, the Chinese sort of, the netizens, for want of a better word, seem to have taken off on our decision to sort of suspend the treaty, and they're talking about, speeding up construction of the Yarlung Zanglo, which is the Brahmaputra, and they're saying that if the dammed waters of the Yarlung Zangbo are released, it could cause severe flooding and devastation downstream. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, it's quite a ironic situation now. On the Brahmaputra, India is a lower riparian. On the Indus Basin, India is an upper riparian. So,
Mm-hmm.
so India has to think from a very different perspective on either side. On the western side, on the Indus, and the eastern
Mm-hmm.
side on Brahmaputra. Now, China is an um, s- absolute powerful country on water resources. It views water as a strategic resource.
Right.
It ideologically a very powerful country, and we are successively seeing what they're doing, the dams that they're building, not only on the Yarlung Brahmaputra, but also on the Mekong and the various other dams, rivers that flow into various other neighboring countries. The
Mm-hmm.
recent mega dam that they have announced will have to be carefully studied by us on the kind of
Mm-hmm.
impact it will have on us as a downright area. We
Okay.
don't have treaty with China, like Pakistan and India have a treaty, and Pakistan can complain through the treaty. We don't have such treaty with China. We just have a memorandum of understanding, and which is renewed after every 5 years. So it's not the best of an institutional mechanism that we have with China. We have to rely on whatever they give us in terms of
Mm-hmm.
data. But one would imagine, therefore, that we are in a very tricky and difficult um, situation vis-a-vis China as a lower riparian. But that is not necessarily the case. I think if you do a proper evaluation of things, we can be a little more stronger on our side in terms of building our capabilities and building our capacities on the Brahmaputra. Remember, there's a lot of water on our side that we can develop. So we don't
Mm-hmm.
really have to immediately worry about less water from China
Mm-hmm.
at this stage. What can be dangerous is if China deliberately and intentionally allows the flow of water from its sides to flood us. Right? So
Right.
that could be a worry. So we have to not be sort of determined by this China phobia that we have, fearing what the Chinese would do. We need to be proactive in our approach. We need to have a broader water footprint in the Northeast, which means first and foremost we start thinking in terms of building our storage capacity. And there is here a kind of a correlation between what is happening in the western rivers in Kashmir and what is happening in Arunachal Pradesh. India has
Mm-hmm.
a very water storage capacity. We have about 1800 BCM of available water, and in which we store about 250 BCM of water. So, for a growing
Mm-hmm.
economy the size of India, the storage capacity is very, very low, and we need
Mm-hmm.
to expand storage capacity. And one of the areas to
Mm-hmm.
expand is these areas, the mountainous areas in the northeast and in Jammu and Kashmir.
Mm-hmm.
Probably we've not done this, fearing that it is on the border, fearing that it is China on one side and Pakistan on the other side. I think there has to be a renewed emphasis on building storage capacities in these areas. Of course, it has to be done very carefully. The entire landform has to be studied because these are seismic zones. But I think science will have to play an important role in picking the right locations for our storage capacities in Arunachal Pradesh. There are already some dams being built. There's a big project, the Subanshree Lower Dam and the Upper Siang hydroelectricity project. These will be notable projects that will be developed, and these will be storage projects. So if there is a release, intentional release of water from the Chinese side, you'll have the capability and the capacity to store that release of water. The other thing to look at when you're dealing with China is flood control mitigation. And this has to be a renewed effort again in the Northeast. Because every year we see flood as a huge problem. And control mechanism, mitigation efforts needs to be redefined, keeping in mind the new challenges that are emerging, not only with China building its structures there, but also the climate change impact, etc. One of the myths that has been around in the Northeast, despite some attention recently, is inland navigation. I think that needs to be also strengthened. There are about 1,800 kilometers of inland navigation, viable inland navigation through the rivers in the Northeast. So that needs also to be thought about. But diplomatically, we can also play an important role. India can be very central in how to deal with China on the rivers. For example, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh are all lower riparian countries to China. So the rivers that come from China come to these countries. And I think collectively, sub-regionally, the BBIN will be a very important sort of a collective force to deal with China together, to seek information, to raise concerns, to ask China about what they're doing. So that might be valuable. Also, India can play an important role in bringing together a lower riparian coalition, not only with the South Asian countries, but also look at Southeast Asian countries, for example, the countries on the Mekong River. So there could be a lower riparian alliance or partnership which can sort of collectively engage with China or ask and seek information from China on what they're doing on the rivers. We also have what is called the Mekong Ganga Cooperation, started in 2002. That needs also to be reactivated with a certain purpose, so that we have this kind of a fruitful, effective partnership between the lower riparian countries, so that we do not just fear the Chinese, but turn certain issues into a certain advantage for us.
So we're almost running out of time, and I know you are also very busy today. So let me ask you my quick second last question, sir. That let's set aside the ecological and environmental issues. So there's a lot of political challenges being faced vis-a-vis building dams in Arunachal. Where are we with that? I mean, are we working on fixing those quickly?
Yes, it is a sensitive matter. It's not an easy thing. Unlike the Chinese, what they do is, they decide and they do it. The system makes it easier for them to do it. For us, it is difficult, no doubt. There are, even in the projects in Kashmir, there are issues related to displacement. People have raised voice. There's deforestation. There could be dangerous impact on building such dams in a very seismic zone. But I think it requires more local involvement when you're building projects. And this is going to be another important factor when you build projects now in India, that it cannot be top-driven completely. It has to be brought in through ground understanding. Before the projects come, there has to be engagement with the local people. They need to be made aware. They have to be educated about what it is. And adequate compensation has to be also resolved. So these will be the new changes when you look at infrastructure development on water resources. We have to keep in mind the democratization and also the decentralization aspects together when you think about such big projects. Any imposition of projects without calculating the ground realities might be very detrimental.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Ram.
That was Uttam Kumar Sinha, a leading scholar and commentator on transboundary rivers, perhaps one of India's finest analysts of transboundary issues, talking to us about the Indus Water Treaty and the recent decision to hold it in abeyance by India, and also giving us a broader perspective of where we are vis-a-vis water, not just in India, but across the subcontinent. I do hope you enjoyed this particular edition of The Gist, and I look forward to having you with us again. Till then, this is Ramananda Sengupta signing out.